By the time he begins to comprehend this reality, years have slipped away, and the realization arrives with a bitterness akin to betrayal. What once seemed honorable gradually morphs into a quiet form of surrender. The world, which favors results over intentions, moves past him without a hint of apology. He observes others rise, men who may not be more intelligent or even more disciplined than he is, yet they advance with a disconcerting speed. The difference lies not in effort, but in the realization that they have ceased to play a game designed to keep them harmless. In youth, a man learns that fairness leads to respect, that patience will be rewarded, and that hard work combined with kindness will open doors. These notions feel noble, even comforting, but they are crafted for stability rather than ascent. Stability benefits those already in power, while order protects the established. Thus, the young man obediently follows rules that older, more experienced players subtly rewrite among themselves. Machiavelli grasped this pattern centuries ago, observing courts where polite men starved while decisive men governed kingdoms. He understood that morality, as most people practice it, often revolves around compliance rather than virtue. A man who insists on fairness in an unfair arena does not purify the space. He merely disarms himself. The crowd that praises his integrity will not share its power with him. Praise is cheap, while status is seized by the strategic. The shift that occurs after 30 is subtle yet irreversible. A man begins to realize that influence is not bestowed upon those who appear virtuous, but rather on those perceived as formidable. Being formidable does not equate to recklessness or cruelty for its own sake. It involves being calculated and controlled, knowing precisely when to speak, when to remain silent, when to concede, and when to press an advantage without hesitation. Distinguishing between reckless aggression and strategic ruthlessness is essential. The reckless man lashes out, driven by impulse, leaving damage that ultimately returns to haunt him. In contrast, the strategic man moves with precision, selecting his battles carefully, striking only when the outcome is nearly certain, and leaving minimal trace behind. One burns bridges in anger, the other builds bridges to cross only once, extracting value before quietly moving on. To an observer, both may appear ruthless, but in truth, only one survives. There exists an art to appearing clean while making calculated moves. The powerful rarely announce their intentions. They cultivate reputations of reason, patience, and even generosity. Yet, behind this facade, they negotiate relentlessly, protect their interests without apology, and ensure that every alliance serves a purpose. Loyalty, in its pure emotional form, is fragile currency. Mutual benefit, however, endures. An alliance built on sentiment dissolves the moment feelings change, while one built on advantage remains stable because both parties understand precisely what they stand to lose. Fairness, as most men perceive it, is a comforting illusion. The world is governed not by fairness, but by leverage, which dictates who speaks and who listens, who waits and who commands, who struggles and who accumulates. A man who refuses to see this remains trapped in a defensive posture, reacting rather than acting, hoping rather than shaping. Hope, in the arena of power, is a poor strategy. Picture a general surveying a battlefield at dawn. The mist hangs thick, the terrain is uneven, and the enemy is unseen yet present. The naive commander charges forward, trusting in the purity of his cause to carry the day. The seasoned commander, however, waits. He studies the wind, the ground, and the rhythm of distant movements. He sends scouts, gathers fragments of information, and strikes only when the terrain itself becomes his ally. Both men are brave, but only one is dangerous. Status is earned not through virtue signaling, but through visible competence and invisible calculation. Men rise when others believe they control outcomes, when their presence alters decisions in a room, when their silence carries more weight than another man's speech. This kind of authority is never accidental. It is cultivated through observation, restraint, and understanding the fears and desires that move people beneath the surface of their words. Emotional attachment to always doing the right thing, as defined by others, quietly undermines advancement. Ethics are not useless, but ethics without strategy become chains. There exists a distinction between being ethical and being exploitable. The ethical man deliberately chooses his principles and defends them with strength, while the exploitable man follows every rule without question, even when those rules serve only to weaken him. After 30, the game reveals itself to those willing to see. The rules that once felt absolute begin to appear negotiable, and boundaries that once seemed permanent reveal small openings, gray zones where outcomes are shaped by those bold enough to act. Most men hesitate at this threshold, afraid of what they might become if they step beyond the comforting illusion of innocence. The truth is simple. Power does not belong to the most innocent. It belongs to the most aware. The man who rises learns to move differently. He listens more than he speaks, studies more than he reacts, and understands that appearing calm while others panic is itself a form of dominance. He learns that reputation is a shield, timing is a blade, and patience is often the most ruthless weapon of all. Like a storm gathering beyond the horizon, his presence is felt long before it is seen. When he finally moves, the outcome feels inevitable, as if events themselves conspired in his favor. Many fail to grasp that the world does not punish weakness immediately. It tolerates it, even rewarding it for a time. This delay makes the trap so effective. A man who plays clean after 30 may still receive compliments, still be seen as respectable, and still believe he is progressing. Yet beneath the surface, the machinery of advancement moves around him, not with him. He becomes useful, dependable, and predictable. In the language of power, predictable means controllable. The first realization that separates those who rise from those who remain stagnant is unsettling. Influence is rarely granted to the most deserving. It is granted to the most useful, to those who already possess influence. This is why alliances built on mutual benefit endure, while relationships based purely on loyalty dissolve under pressure. Loyalty demands sacrifice, while benefit rewards cooperation. Men, regardless of their claims, move according to incentives more reliably than they move according to sentiment. Machiavelli observed that princes relying on affection alone were often abandoned at the first sign of danger, while those who ensured their allies profited from their success found loyalty that appeared unbreakable. The lesson is never that affection is worthless, but that affection without advantage is fragile. As men approach 30, a psychological shift must occur. The transition from defense to offense. In youth, men are taught to avoid mistakes, protect their reputation, and minimize risk. This mindset produces careful workers and obedient citizens, but rarely produces leaders. The man who rises begins to think differently. He no longer asks how to avoid losing. He asks how to win decisively. He understands that risk cannot be eliminated, only managed, and that hesitation often carries a greater cost than action. Yet strategic ruthlessness requires control, as the line between calculated moves and visible corruption is thin. The powerful understand how to operate in gray areas without drawing attention, how to pursue advantage without appearing predatory, and how to enforce boundaries without displaying hostility. Reputation becomes armor, perception becomes a weapon, and the most effective moves are often those that appear ordinary to the outside observer. Consider a negotiation in a quiet room where one man speaks constantly, justifying and revealing his intentions, while the other listens, revealing nothing of his position. When the agreement is reached, the first man feels relieved, only to realize later that every concession moved in one direction, subtly shaped by the silence of the man across from him. Many men confuse morality with passivity, believing that to be ethical is to yield, to accommodate, and to avoid conflict at all costs. However, ethics and passivity are not synonymous. The ethical man defends his interests without cruelty, while the passive man abandons his interests to avoid discomfort. One earns respect, the other invites exploitation. The world respects strength, even when it dislikes it, and quickly learns which kind of man it is dealing with. After 30, time itself becomes a strategic factor. Opportunities that once seemed endless begin to narrow, and energy must be directed with precision. Distractions that once felt harmless reveal their cost. The man who rises becomes selective with his attention, ruthless with his schedule, and deliberate with his associations. He understands that every hour invested in trivial pursuits is an hour transferred to a rival who is planning, building, or positioning himself for advantage. Perception governs status more powerfully than reality. Men do not respond to what is true, but to what appears true. The one who understands this does not waste time insisting on recognition. He shapes perception, allowing results to speak in ways words cannot. The man who allows others to underestimate him when it serves his purposes, permits his reputation to grow in controlled increments, much like a fire spreading beneath the surface before becoming visible. Imagine a wolf moving through a forest at night. It does not announce its presence or rush without reason. It studies the herd's movements, the wind's direction, and the moment when attention falters. When it finally moves, the outcome appears sudden, but the preparation was patient and methodical. Strategic men operate similarly. They observe longer, prepare longer, and when they act, the result seems effortless. This is why fairness, as commonly understood, becomes a trap. The man who insists on playing by rules that others quietly bend places himself at a permanent disadvantage. He mistakes compliance for virtue, and in doing so, becomes a tool in systems designed by men far less restrained. The one who rises does not abandon principles entirely. He chooses them carefully, understanding which rules preserve order and which exist merely to keep him obedient. The transformation continues as the man who once sought approval begins to seek leverage. The man who once feared being disliked begins to understand that respect and affection rarely travel together. The man who once waited for permission begins to move without asking. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he becomes someone others watch carefully. Someone whose decisions carry weight, whose silence feels deliberate rather than uncertain. At a certain point, the man who studies power notices something unsettling. Those who dominate rooms, control negotiations, and accumulate wealth rarely appear obsessed with morality in the way ordinary men are. They do not expend energy proving they are good. They ensure they are effective. This difference, subtle at first, becomes enormous over time because effectiveness compounds while moral posturing merely exhausts. The transition from moral idealism to strategic pragmatism is gradual, shedding illusions. A man begins to see that the world resembles a marketplace more than a courtroom. In a courtroom, truth and justice are supposed to prevail, while in a marketplace, outcomes belong to those who understand leverage, timing, and negotiation. The man who treats every situation as a moral test finds himself constantly disappointed, while the one who studies incentives begins to predict outcomes with unsettling accuracy. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must learn how to be good, a statement often misunderstood. It does not mean embracing cruelty or abandoning principles. It means recognizing that rigid goodness applied blindly becomes weakness. The leader who refuses to deceive, even when deception would prevent catastrophe, condemns himself and those who depend on him. History remembers results, not intentions. Strategic ruthlessness, when understood properly, is quiet, controlled, and often invisible. The strategically ruthless man rarely raises his voice or threatens. He shapes situations so that outcomes favor him with calm precision. Recklessness is the enemy of power. It draws attention, while strategy avoids it. Many men fear adopting this mindset, fearing they may become monstrous or detached from humanity. Yet calculated action does not erase humanity. It refines it. The surgeon who cuts to save a life is not cruel for using a blade, just as the general who maneuvers troops to end a war quickly is not heartless for understanding that violence is not brutality, but precision. Observe the difference between the emotional man who reacts predictably and the strategic man who remains unreadable. Status in every era follows those who control perception. It is not enough to be capable. One must appear capable. It is not enough to be disciplined. One must appear composed under pressure. The strategically ruthless man understands that reputation is built through carefully chosen moments of visibility. He speaks rarely, but when he does, others listen. He acts sparingly, but when he acts, others remember. The matter of gray areas, those ambiguous spaces where rules become negotiable, often holds the greatest opportunities, and the man who learns to navigate them gains access to possibilities invisible to those who require certainty before acting. Imagine a chessboard in the middle of a long match. The inexperienced player focuses on immediate threats, reacting move by move, while the master studies the entire board, planning several moves ahead. Sometimes, He sacrifices a piece to secure a position that guarantees victory 10 moves later. To the observer, the sacrifice looks like a mistake, but only later does the pattern become clear. Strategic ruthlessness often resembles patience disguised as risk. Another truth reveals itself as a man studies patterns of influence. The powerful do not always break rules openly. They redefine them quietly. They change standards, shift expectations, and alter incentives until what was once unacceptable becomes normal. The naive protest. The strategic adapt, sometimes even shaping it. Power is not merely the ability to act. It is the ability to shape the conditions under which others must act. This is why emotional attachment to doing the right thing, as defined by others, becomes so dangerous. The man who requires universal approval before moving will never move decisively. There will always be critics, resistance, and uncertainty. The strategically ruthless man understands that action creates clarity. Waiting for clarity before acting is often the surest way to remain powerless. This way of thinking reshapes a man completely. He begins to observe rather than react, to calculate rather than assume, and to prepare rather than hope. Most victories are decided long before the final move in quiet moments of planning and positioning that no one else notices. As this awareness deepens, something changes in how others perceive him. Conversations become more careful, challenges less frequent, and opportunities appear, sometimes without explanation, as if drawn by an invisible gravity. Once a man begins to see these patterns clearly, he also notices something even more uncomfortable. The greatest obstacles to his advancement are rarely external enemies but internal restraints. These restraints feel like conscience, prudence, or wisdom. Yet many are nothing more than inherited fears disguised as virtue. One of the most potent of these restraints is the desire to be seen as good in the eyes of everyone. This desire is subtle and survives even in men who believe themselves independent. They hesitate before making decisive moves, not because the move is unwise, but because they imagine how it will be judged. They soften their words, dilute their intentions, and postpone their actions in pursuit of an approval that rarely brings any real advantage. Meanwhile, those who understand the game act without waiting, and the distance between them grows silently year by year. Machiavelli observed that men judge more by the eye than by the end. Everyone can see, but few can truly perceive. This is why appearing just often matters more than being just, and why appearing decisive often matters more than endless deliberation. The strategically ruthless man understands that perception must be managed with care. He does not reveal every calculation or announce every ambition. He allows others to see only what strengthens his position while keeping the rest in shadow. Timing separates amateurs from masters. Many believe success results from effort alone, that persistence will inevitably yield results. While effort is necessary, timing multiplies or destroys its value. The merchant who invests before a market rises appears brilliant, while the one who invests after looks foolish, even if both possess equal intelligence. Strategic men study cycles, moods, and patterns, waiting for moments when a small move produces a disproportionate effect. Consider a river cutting through stone. It does not attack the mountain directly, but follows the path of least resistance, wearing away obstacles slowly until what once seemed immovable collapses. Strategic ruthlessness often works in this way, relying on positioning, patience, and the quiet accumulation of advantage until resistance becomes impossible. Another illusion that traps many men is the belief that reputation is built through constant visibility. They feel compelled to speak, post, explain, and justify, believing that presence equals influence. Yet the opposite is often true. Scarcity creates value. The voice rarely heard carries more weight than the one that fills every silence. The man who appears only when necessary becomes associated with importance, while the one who is always present becomes part of the background noise. There is a psychological power in restraint that few understand. When a man refuses to react immediately, others begin to reveal themselves. They speak more than intended, expose weaknesses, and betray impatience. Silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a mirror in which others see themselves more clearly than expected, revealing information that no interrogation could produce. Strategic ruthlessness also requires emotional discipline. as anger, pride, and resentment are tools easily manipulated. The man who cannot control his emotions advertises his vulnerabilities, while the composed man becomes unpredictable. There is a moment in every negotiation, rivalry, and contest when the balance shifts. It rarely happens dramatically. It occurs quietly when one side realizes the other cannot be easily influenced, provoked, or rushed. Respect replaces dismissal, caution replaces aggression, and from that moment forward, the dynamics change, often permanently. This power shift defines those who rise. They no longer move according to the expectations of others, but shape expectations instead. They no longer defend every position. They choose which positions matter and abandon the rest without regret. They no longer measure success by approval or applause. They measure it by outcomes, leverage, and the quiet expansion of their influence. The transformation deepens as the man who once sought certainty begins to operate comfortably within ambiguity. The man who once feared being misunderstood accepts that misunderstanding can sometimes be an advantage. The man who once believed that fairness governed the world begins to see that fairness is often a story told to those who have yet to learn how power truly moves. As this understanding matures, another realization takes shape. One few are willing to confront honestly. The majority of people are not competing at the level they believe they are. They are competing within systems designed to keep them occupied, distracted by small victories, chasing recognition that lacks real power. They mistake motion for progress, activity for influence, and approval for status. Meanwhile, the men who truly rise are often invisible during the early stages of their ascent, building leverage quietly while others seek attention. One defining trait of the strategically ruthless man is his relationship with attention. He understands that attention is a resource, not a reward. Every time he draws it, he does so deliberately and with purpose, withdrawing it just as carefully. Those who crave constant visibility become predictable, easy to study, and easy to counter. In contrast, those who appear only at decisive moments create an aura of weight and consequence. Their presence alters the atmosphere of a room, not through demands, but because others sense the discipline behind their restraint. Machiavelli observed that men are far more influenced by appearances than by reality. This insight extends beyond reputation into the realm of status itself. Status is not merely what a man possesses, it is what others believe he possesses. It is the perception of competence, confidence, and ability. The strategically ruthless man cultivates this perception carefully. He does not boast, as boasting signals insecurity. Instead, he allows results to speak. When results are not yet visible, he lets silence create mystery. The matter of alliances determines the speed and scale of advancement more than individual effort ever could. Many men build relationships based on familiarity, comfort, or shared history. These connections may provide emotional support, but rarely produce significant movement. Strategic alliances are built on shared interests, complementary strengths, and clear expectations. They are functional rather than sentimental, and because of this, they endure longer and produce greater outcomes. The man who understands this evaluates every relationship through a different lens. He asks not only who he enjoys being around but who sharpens his thinking, who expands his opportunities, who challenges his assumptions, and who drains his time without adding value. This evaluation is not cruel, it is necessary. Time, after 30, becomes too valuable to spend in circles that produce no forward motion. There is a discipline required to operate in this way, a discipline that often feels isolating at first. The strategically ruthless man cannot always explain his decisions because many interpret calculation as coldness and restraint as indifference. He accepts this misunderstanding as part of the cost of clarity. He understands that being liked by everyone is not only impossible but dangerous, as the desire to please weakens judgment and invites compromise at the worst moments. Imagine a craftsman shaping a blade. Each stroke of the file removes a small imperfection, refining the edge until it becomes capable of cutting cleanly and precisely. This process is slow, deliberate, and often invisible to those who do not understand what they are watching. Yet, when the blade is finally complete, its effectiveness appears effortless. Strategic ruthlessness works similarly. It is not a single decision, but a series of small, disciplined choices repeated consistently until they reshape a man's entire way of thinking. Another truth becomes evident as this mindset develops. Most men are governed by short-term emotions, by the desire for immediate satisfaction, and by the fear of temporary discomfort. They abandon long-term strategies for short-term relief and trade their future influence for present convenience. The strategically ruthless man reverses this pattern, accepting discomfort as the price of momentum. He delays gratification, not out of virtue but calculation, knowing that patience multiplies outcomes in ways impulse never can. Over time, this patience produces a quiet confidence that cannot be imitated. It is not the loud confidence of bravado or the brittle confidence of self-promotion. It is the calm certainty of a man who knows he is positioned well, who understands the terrain, and who sees the direction of movement before others notice it. This kind of confidence is difficult to challenge because it is rooted in preparation rather than ego. Thus, the gap between those who play clean and those who play strategically continues to widen. One group waits for permission, for fairness, for recognition, while the other creates circumstances in which permission becomes irrelevant, fairness becomes negotiable, and recognition becomes inevitable. The difference is not talent, it is awareness, the willingness to see the world as it is rather than as it was described in youth. Eventually, there comes a moment when the transformation is no longer theoretical, but real. A man recognizes that he no longer reacts to the world as he once did. Situations that once provoked anxiety now invite analysis. Conflicts that once felt personal now appear strategic, and the noise of public opinion, which once felt overwhelming, fades into something distant and irrelevant. What replaces it is clarity, and with clarity comes a formidable kind of control. The most dangerous shift is not merely learning how to act ruthlessly, it is learning how to think without illusions. Illusions are comforting, which is why they are difficult to abandon. The illusion that fairness governs outcomes, the illusion that effort alone determines success, and the illusion that approval is a reliable measure of value. All these fall away as a man begins to see the mechanisms beneath the surface. The incentives, the fears, the silent negotiations that shape every hierarchy become visible, and once seen, these mechanisms cannot be unseen. Machiavelli understood that power is rarely seized in dramatic moments. It accumulates quietly, like water filling a reservoir behind a dam. Each decision, each alliance, and each calculated silence adds a small measure of influence, until one day the difference becomes undeniable to the outside observer. The rise appears sudden to the untrained eye, but to the man who built it, it feels inevitable, the result of countless small moves made with patience and precision. There is also the realization that status is not a destination, but a position that must be maintained. Many men rise quickly, only to fall just as quickly because they mistake achievement for permanence. The strategically ruthless man never makes this mistake. He understands that influence is fluid, that every position invites rivals, and that every success creates expectations. He does not relax in comfort. He reinforces his position constantly, strengthening alliances, refining his skills, and watching carefully for changes in the environment. Consider the image of a fortress standing on a hill. Its walls are thick, its gates reinforced, and its defenders disciplined. Yet the wise commander does not assume the fortress will defend itself forever. He inspects the walls, studies the surrounding terrain, and watches the horizon for movement. He prepares not because an attack is certain, but because neglect invites one. Power, like the fortress, survives only when maintained with vigilance. Another truth becomes clear as this mindset settles into habit. Respect is often born not from kindness but from boundaries. The man who refuses to tolerate disrespect, who protects his time, and who declines demands that offer no return, gradually teaches others how to treat him. Those who give endlessly, hoping to be appreciated, often discover that generosity without limits invites contempt rather than gratitude. Value must be protected to be recognized. There is also the matter of fear, which many misunderstand completely. Fear is not always an enemy. In controlled amounts, it sharpens perception and encourages preparation. The strategically ruthless man does not eliminate fear. He studies it. He asks what it reveals, what risk it points toward, and what weakness it exposes. By confronting fear deliberately rather than avoiding it, he transforms it into awareness, and awareness into advantage. As the years pass, this mindset reshapes not only a man's actions, but his presence. Others begin to sense a difference that is difficult to describe. He speaks less, but his words carry weight. He moves calmly, but his decisions produce movement around him. He appears unhurried, yet his progress is steady and unmistakable. There is an economy in everything he does, a precision that suggests intention rather than impulse. After 30, playing clean in the naive sense, playing only to appear virtuous, only to be liked, only to avoid discomfort, becomes a slow surrender of influence. The world does not reward harmlessness at the highest levels. It rewards those who understand how power moves, who know when to step forward and when to step back, and who can operate within gray areas without losing control of themselves. In the end, the strategically ruthless man is not defined by cruelty but by clarity. He sees the game as it is, not as he wishes it to be. He accepts that status is earned through positioning, that wealth is built through calculated action, and that influence belongs to those willing to act while others hesitate. See you there. The world does not reward fairness. It rewards awareness. After a certain point in life, the rules become clear. Those who keep playing by appearances stay stuck, while those who understand leverage, timing, and human nature begin to rise quietly and decisively. Engage with this message. Share your thoughts in the comments. Are you ready to stop playing the game blindly and start playing it consciously? If this message resonated with you, write in the comments, "I see the game." Let's see how many are truly ready to rise in status instead of remaining trapped in illusion. Keep watching the next video. It is more important than you imagine.